shut that jet down or we will shoot your landing gear off." The threat echoed across Ellsworth Air Base like a gunshot, but the F-35 didn't stop. It accelerated, sirens blared, guards scrambled. The runway became a battlefield of orders and disbelief. Because Lena Moravec wasn't flying for glory, she was flying because someone had to, and everyone else had already said no. She wasn't cleared, she wasn't trusted, but she knew something they didn't. The countdown had already begun, and in the next 7 minutes she'd save 3 cities from destruction. This is Veteranbiker? Comment 1 if you're new. 2 if you've been with us, 3 if you ride with us every week. Like, subscribe, and stay to the end. The ceaseless biting wind of South Dakota howled across the sprawling tarmac of Ellsworth Air Base, a desolate, unforgiving landscape that seemed to swallow sound. The cold wasn't just physical, it was a palpable presence seeping into the concrete and metal, a constant reminder of the isolation and scale of this vast military outpost. Against this austere backdrop, the angular, defiant silhouettes of F-35 Lightning TIIs stood like metallic guardians, their stealthy contours a testament to human ingenuity and a silent promise of unparalleled power. Within this formidable array of modern might, a single figure moved with a quiet, almost spectral purpose: Senior Airman Lena Moravec. At 23 years old, Lena was an embodiment of contradictions. Her small frame, barely 5'4", and her quiet demeanor made her nearly invisible among the towering fighter jets and the boisterous camaraderie of the ground crews. Yet, beneath the surface of this unassuming Czech-born maintenance technician lay an intellect and a reservoir of knowledge that few could fathom. She wasn't just a mechanic, she was a polymath of the skies, an individual whose understanding of these complex machines rivaled, and in some ways surpassed, that of the certified pilots who flew them. Her world had been shaped not by a military academy, but by a childhood steeped in the lore and science of aviation. Her father, a retired Czech Air Force colonel, was her first and most influential teacher. His bedtime stories weren't tales of fairy tale kingdoms, but vivid accounts of MiG-29 dogfights, of thrust-to-weight ratios, and the sheer audacity of flight. These stories were followed by hands-on lessons, detailed diagrams drawn on napkins, and late-night discussions in a garage filled with the scent of oil and old manuals. He taught her to see an aircraft not as a collection of parts, but as a living system, where every component, every wire, and every fluid line played a crucial role in a delicate symphony of controlled chaos. This unconventional education became Lena's secret advantage. While her peers at Ellsworth learned their duties within the rigid confines of their specialties, one focused on hydraulics, another on avionics, Lena had a holistic understanding of the entire weapon system. She knew that a hydraulic pressure drop could be a symptom of a much larger, more complex issue in the flight control software, a relationship that only a pilot-turned-engineer would truly grasp. She was a systems thinker in a world of component specialists. This morning, as she knelt by the F-35's landing gear, her calloused hands expertly checking the hydraulic pressure readings, she was performing a routine task. But her mind was miles ahead, mentally simulating the potential stresses the gear would endure during a high G turn, a habit she had developed to keep her knowledge sharp. The hangar hummed with the predictable rhythm of a well-oiled military machine. Ground crews conducted pre-flight inspections, their voices a mixture of professional jargon and casual banter. Staff Sergeant Rivera, a seasoned crew chief with a no-nonsense attitude, strode past, his attention divided between his clipboard and the distant whine of a jet engine warming up. He gave Lena a curt nod. a form of professional acknowledgement that acknowledged her competence without inviting conversation. In his eyes, Lena was reliable, meticulous and quiet, exactly what was expected of ground crew personnel. He respected her work ethic, but never once considered the depth of her knowledge, a knowledge that extended far beyond the pages of her maintenance log. In the 18 months she had served at Ellsworth, Lena had perfected the art of being invisible. She spoke only when spoken to, her accented but precise English reserved for technical discussions. Her small, meticulous world was contained within the hangar, a place where she could lose herself in the intricate beauty of the F-35's design. Her interactions with her roommate, Airman Tessa Clark, were a study in polite distance. Tessa, a loud and gregarious woman from Texas, saw Lena's dedication to studying technical manuals as an oddity. "Why do you waste your time reading that stuff?" Tessa had once asked, her voice laced with genuine puzzlement. "You're never going to be a pilot. American women barely make it through the program, let alone someone from the Czech Republic." The comment wasn't malicious, it was a simple statement of what seemed to be an unassailable reality. The path from a foreign-born enlisted maintenance worker to an F-35 pilot was, in the eyes of the institution and her peers, a theoretical impossibility. What no one knew was that her dedication wasn't just a hobby. It was a form of silent rebellion against a system that had categorized her and placed her in a box far too small for her capabilities. In her dorm room, tucked away from prying eyes, her desk was a makeshift command center. It was covered with flight manuals, weather pattern analyses, and tactical aviation publications. Her most prized possession, however, was a tablet loaded with an advanced F-35 flight simulation program she had acquired through her father's extensive network of retired pilots. These weren't basic training programs. They were incredibly detailed, high-fidelity recreations of the F-35's cockpit operations and combat scenarios. For hundreds of hours, Lena had flown these simulated missions, mastering emergency procedures, practicing air-to-air combat tactics, and learning to manage the aircraft's complex weapon systems. By the time she was 18, she had logged over 200 hours of simulated flight time, a number that quietly put her on par with many junior pilots. The hours she spent flying in her dorm room were her escape, a way to keep her childhood dream alive in a reality that seemed determined to crush it. Today, however, the routine was subtly altered. As she finished her morning inspections, a sense of deep foreboding settled over her. Something was wrong. She moved with practiced haste toward the cockpit of the F-35 she was inspecting, a specific diagnostic test in mind. This wasn't a standard maintenance check, it was a stealth integrity test, a procedure designed to verify the aircraft's radar cross-section wasn't compromised by a microfracture or a loose panel. It was a test usually reserved for dedicated avionics teams, but Lena had identified a recurring pattern in maintenance logs that suggested a need for a more proactive approach. She was driven by an uncompromising desire for perfection, a legacy of her father's training. A mechanic fixes a problem. A pilot prevents one. As she climbed into the cockpit, she was immediately enveloped by the futuristic glow of the glass displays. It felt eerily familiar, like coming home. Her hands, calloused from years of wrenching and checking, moved with the precision of a concert pianist across the controls. She initiated the test, her eyes scanning the diagnostics for the slightest anomaly. The quiet focus of her work was interrupted by a presence in the hangar. A tour was passing through, led by Major Callahan, the squadron operations officer. He was a man defined by a rigid adherence to protocol and a staunch belief in the unyielding hierarchy of the military. Alongside him walked Colonel Sarah M.C. Kinley, Unlike Callahan, who saw the hangar as a domain of order and procedure, McKinley saw it as a domain of potential, both realized and untapped. Her reputation was legendary: a former test pilot, a brilliant tactician, and now a high-ranking officer in NORAD with a reputation for shaking up the status quo. She moved with a silent, observant grace, her eyes missing nothing. As she passed the F-35 where Lena was running her test, her gaze fell upon the young woman. Through the narrow cockpit window, Lena's eyes, bright with the focused intensity of a person completely absorbed in their craft, met McKinley's. It was a fleeting, silent exchange. In that brief moment, Colonel M.C. Kinley didn't see a junior airman. She saw a pilot. She saw a deep, intuitive connection between human and machine. She saw a spark of genuine competence that transcended rank and uniform. The encounter lasted no more than a second, but it was an acknowledgement that a powerful mind was at work in a place where it wasn't expected to be. Major Callahan, oblivious to the silent communication, continued his tour, his voice droning on about maintenance schedules and flight readiness statistics. Colonel M.C. Kinley, however, fell silent for a moment, her mind whirring. She chose not to intervene, not to question, and not to draw attention to the young technician. Instead, she filed the observation away, a piece of an unconventional puzzle that she knew, with a veteran's instinct, might one day be crucial. Lena, unaware of the profound impact of that fleeting glance, finished her stealth test and meticulously logged her findings. The results were flawless. As she closed the cockpit, the echo of Colonel M.C. Kinley's passing gaze remained, a strange, electric feeling of being seen for who she truly was, not just for the stripes on her sleeve. The day continued its normal course, but a storm was brewing beyond the horizon, a crisis that would shatter the rigid assumptions of the military and force, the institution to look past rank and uniform. To the one person who had been preparing for this moment her entire life, the technician nobody saw. The hum of Ellsworth Air Base was a constant low-frequency presence, a rhythmic undercurrent to the daily grind of maintenance, training, and logistics. It was the sound of a system operating with flawless, almost monotonous precision. That rhythm shattered at 0847 hours, replaced by a piercing, warbling shriek, the base-wide emergency klaxon. The sound was not a drill, it was a visceral, jarring signal that something fundamentally unexpected and deeply serious was unfolding. Ground crews, their conversations abruptly silenced, stopped their work. Heads turned in unison toward the command tower, its rotating red lights casting an ominous glow on the already somber morning. A voice, crisp and authoritative, broke through the communication system. All personnel, this is not a drill. Report to emergency stations immediately. All aircraft operations are suspended pending further orders. The methodical hum of the base had given way to a frantic, directed chaos. Lena Moravec, in the middle of a post-inspection review, secured her tools with a sense of grim certainty. Her training, her father's training, had prepared her for this moment. She was a keen observer, and in the months of her quiet work, she had noticed the subtle, almost imperceptible increases in intelligence traffic, the fleeting glances of senior officers at classified briefings. She knew that the geopolitical tensions simmering beneath the surface were about to boil over. Following protocol, she made her way to Building 242, the squadron briefing room, where ground crew and pilots alike would be briefed on the developing situation. The parking lot was a torrent of humanity, airmen moving with a mixture of practiced readiness and palpable concern, their faces a canvas of professional discipline stretched thin by the unexpected. Inside the briefing room, the air was thick with a tension that was both suffocating and electric. Major Callahan, a man whose entire existence was predicated on order and adherence to the chain of command, stood before a large tactical display. His face, usually a mask of unshakable authority, was etched with strain. The screen showed a map of the central United States, where several amber zones marked areas of concern. But the most alarming part was a cluster of red symbols, moving with a chilling purpose from the northwest, approaching American airspace from an unexpected vector. Officers hunched over tablets, whispering urgently among themselves, their low murmurs a stark contrast to the silence that gripped the room. "Listen up!" Callahan's voice cut through the nervous chatter, amplified by the sound system. At 0830 hours, NORAD radar stations detected multiple unidentified aircraft approaching U.S. airspace from the northwest. These aircraft are not responding to standard identification protocols and appear to be flying in formation at high altitude. The screen updated, showing a projected flight path that would take the intruders over several critical infrastructure targets, including major population centers and military installations. The implications were clear. This was not a test. This was not a routine patrol. This was a potential combat situation, one that could escalate with catastrophic speed. Lena stood near the back wall, a shadow in the room, her presence barely registered by the high-ranking officers who dominated the space. She had arrived to clarify a discrepancy in the maintenance logs for a specific aircraft, 075,267, but the unfolding crisis had made her original purpose feel trivial. Her father had always emphasized that a true aviator, whether pilot or mechanic, must understand the strategic context of their work. As she studied the tactical display, she processed the data not just from a maintenance perspective, but from a pilot's. She saw the approach vector, the potential targets, and the critical time window for an effective response. This was a scenario she had run countless times in her secret simulator, and the grim reality of it was tightening a knot in her stomach. Our intelligence indicates these may be reconnaissance aircraft probing our defensive capabilities, Callahan continued, his voice tight with controlled urgency. However, we cannot rule out hostile intent. We need 4 F-35 seconds airborne within 30 minutes to establish intercept positions. He began to assign pilots, and the selected aviators, their expressions a mask of focused intensity, began to file out. They were the elite, the chosen few entrusted with commanding these complex weapon systems. But as they reached the exit, a crackle of static cut through the air, followed by a frantic transmission over Callahan's radio. "Sir, this is Tech Sergeant Doyle in maintenance control. We have a problem with aircraft readiness." The room fell silent again, the fragile hope of a quick response dissipating. Callahan keyed his radio, his face a mask of visible frustration. "What kind of problem, Doyle?" "Sir, we've got 2 F-35 seconds down for emergency maintenance. Hydraulic system failures that require immediate attention. Aircraft 075,221 and 075,267 are not mission capable." The words hung in the air like a death sentence for the mission. The squadron needed 4 aircraft, but only 2 were immediately available. A whispered, urgent conversation began between Callahan and his operations officer. The clock was ticking, and with each passing second, the window for a successful intercept was narrowing. The unidentified aircraft were moving with a purpose, and they would not wait for a full formation to be assembled. Lena, standing in the shadows, felt her heart race. Aircraft 075,267, that was the jet she had just finished inspecting, the one for which she had come to clarify maintenance logs. She knew that jet intimately. She knew its systems, its quirks, its every weakness and strength. She knew that Tech Sergeant Doyle's assessment was, from a certain perspective, inaccurate. The hydraulic failure was real, but it was not a fatal flaw. She had memorized the emergency procedures, the technical orders, the very fine print of the maintenance manuals that others overlooked. She knew the solution. As the officers grew more desperate, their conversations a panicked spiral of limited options and unpalatable compromises, Lena made a decision. Her father's voice, a memory from 1,000 bedtime stories, echoed in her mind. The greatest courage is not to follow orders blindly, but to find a better way when the orders are leading to failure. She had been trained her entire life to solve problems like this, not just to identify them. She stepped forward, her voice, though soft, cutting through the din of conversation with the clarity of a bell. "Sir, I might be able to help with the maintenance issue." Heads turned toward her, a sea of confused, irritated faces. They were looking at a junior airman, a maintenance tech, someone whose voice was not supposed to be heard in this room. Major Callahan looked at her, his face a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. "Moravec, this is not the time for routine maintenance questions. We're dealing with a national security emergency." "Sir, I understand the situation," Lena replied, her voice steady despite the overwhelming pressure of being the center of attention. "But I've been working on aircraft 075,267. The hydraulic problem isn't as severe as the initial assessment indicates. With the right approach, I could have that aircraft mission ready within 20 minutes. Callahan's brief flicker of interest was immediately extinguished by the cold light of protocol. "Negative, Airman." Tech Sergeant Doyle's assessment stands. Air Force regulations require full system redundancy for combat operations. We don't shortcut safety procedures. Sir, with all due respect, Regulation 2F to 35A1, Section 4.7.3 specifically allows single-system hydraulic operations for emergency intercept missions, Lena countered, her knowledge a weapon of precise authority. Provided the primary system shows no degradation and the pilot is briefed on modified procedures. I've reviewed the logs. 075,267 meets those criteria. A stunned silence fell over the room. She had cited a specific technical order, a piece of obscure information that only a handful of senior maintenance specialists and pilots would ever need to know. It was a moment of pure, unassailable competence that completely shattered Callahan's worldview. The very idea that a junior enlisted technician, a woman from the Czech Republic, could possess such a granular level of knowledge was simply incomprehensible to him. Her expertise was a threat to the established order, a challenge to the very foundation of military hierarchy he so vehemently defended. Callahan's face hardened, his voice dripping with condescension. "Moravec, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but your job is to keep our aircraft mechanically sound, not to interpret technical orders outside of your pay grade. Avionics troubleshooting and flight protocol are handled by specialized personnel. Your theory, while interesting, is out of your lane." He waved a dismissive hand. "Focus on getting that hydraulic system repaired through proper procedures and leave the flying to qualified personnel." The dismissal was complete, absolute, and humiliating. The senior officers returned to their panicked discussions, effectively erasing her from the conversation. Lena stood there for a moment, the weight of their institutional blindness pressing down on her. The walk from the briefing room to the hangar was a journey that spanned a few hundred yards, but for Lena Moravec, it felt like an odyssey across an insurmountable chasm. With every step, she was leaving behind the world of regulations, a world where she knew her place, her limits, and the consequences of exceeding them. The air was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, the panic of the base, the urgency of the mission, and a quiet, burning resolve within her that was now a force of its own. She had offered a solution rooted in obscure, meticulous knowledge, and the system had rejected it, preferring to fail rather than to bend. As she pushed open the hangar doors, the vast, echoing space offered a form of sanctuary. The F-35 seconds stood silent, formidable, and waiting. The one she needed, aircraft 075267, was right where she had left it. Her mind, now a finely tuned instrument of logic and process, began to work with a speed and clarity that left no room for doubt or fear. Bypassing protocol was not an act of recklessness. It was an act of surgical precision. Her goal was not to defy authority, but to fill a void that authority had created. She retrieved her specialized toolkit, the very tools of her trade, now repurposed for a mission far grander than their design. Tech Sergeant Doyle's report had cited a 2-hour repair time, but he was operating under the assumption of a full systems overhaul, a textbook response. Lena knew better. The failure was isolated and could be addressed with a manual override procedure, a method she had studied for months. A contingency plan for a contingency plan. She moved with a fluid, almost meditative focus. Her hands, nimble and strong, worked with an economy of motion. She disconnected the secondary hydraulic lines, a delicate process that required a deep understanding of the aircraft's internal anatomy. She then reconfigured the primary system, rerouting its output to compensate for the secondary failure. The work was precise, fast, and driven by a knowledge that was absolute. There was no room for error, no time for hesitation. She was a woman possessed, her entire being dedicated to a single, audacious goal: to make a machine fly, not because she was ordered to, but because it was the only logical choice left. Within 15 minutes, a fraction of the time Doyle had estimated, the repair was complete. The aircraft, to her trained eye, was no longer a casualty of a hydraulic failure. It was a functioning, single-system, redundant interceptor, ready for a mission of life and death. As she secured her tools and took a final sweep of the aircraft, she looked up at the F-35's cockpit. It sat there, an empty throne of power and technology, waiting for its master. This was the moment of no return. Climbing that ladder meant committing to a course of action that would carry with it the full weight of military justice. But the alternative, sitting idly by while a national security crisis deepened, was a weight she could not bear. With a single purposeful stride, she began her ascent. Settling into the ejection seat, Lena was enveloped in a strange sense of familiarity. This was not her first time in an F-35 cockpit, it was merely her first time in a real one. The hundreds of hours she had spent in her dorm room simulator, the countless times she had mentally rehearsed this very sequence, now coalesced into a fluid, instinctual process. Her hands moved across the control panels with the muscle memory of a veteran. She bypassed the standard startup sequences using an emergency protocol she had memorized, a faster, more aggressive path to full power. The systems came to life with a graceful electronic hum. The head-up display flickered on, painting the world outside in a new tactical light. The navigation systems initialized, and the communication equipment synchronized with the base frequencies. It was a beautiful, terrifying symphony of technology. As she completed the final checks, a disembodied voice crackled over her headset, laced with surprise and confusion. Aircraft 075267, this is ground control. We show you powering up without clearance. State your intentions. Lena took a deep breath, her heart pounding a steady, rhythmic drumbeat against her ribs. This was the moment. The words she spoke next would define her future, for better or for worse. Her voice, however, was not the voice of a panicked airman, but the calm, measured voice of a pilot who had rehearsed this very moment countless times. Ground control, this is Senior Airman Moravec in aircraft 075267. I am mission ready for immediate intercept operations. The radio went silent for a beat, a deafening pause that seemed to stretch into an eternity. The controller's response when it came was laced with disbelief. Say again, 075267. Did you identify yourself as Senior Airman Moravec? Affirmative. Ground control. I am requesting immediate clearance for the intercept mission against the unknown aircraft approaching U.S. airspace. Aircraft 075267 is fully mission capable and ready for departure. The base communication system erupted into a storm of overlapping conversations. Her transmission had been instantly relayed to the command center, to Major Callahan, and to every senior officer now desperate for a solution. The calm she had exhibited was now in stark contrast to the chaos her words had unleashed. Moravec, this is Major Callahan. A sharp, furious voice cut through the static, filled with the rage of a man whose carefully constructed world of order had just been dismantled by a single unauthorized action. You are ordered to shut down that aircraft immediately and report to security personnel. You are not authorized for flight operations. You are currently committing multiple violations of federal law and military regulations. This is a theft of military property. Lena knew this was coming. It was the predictable, institutional response to an unpredictable act. She had her own response, one she had meticulously prepared, not as an act of defiance, but as a statement of fact. Sir, I understand your concerns, but I am the only immediately available pilot who can provide the fourth aircraft for proper intercept formation. Unknown hostile aircraft are approaching civilian targets. The hydraulic failure on this aircraft is an isolated issue. Per Technical Order 1F-35A1, Section 4.7.3, single system hydraulic operations are authorized for emergency intercepts provided the primary system is verified. I have verified it. This aircraft is safe and ready to fly. Her words, a torrent of specific, undeniable knowledge, once again brought a brief, disquieting silence. She had not only flown a metaphorical plane outside of her lane, she had landed it with a technical citation that was unassailable. Major Callahan, however, was not a man swayed by facts when they threatened his authority. Moravec, you are not a pilot. You are ground crew. Your simulator hours are meaningless. You are a civilian in a military uniform, a mechanic who has overstepped her bounds. You have 10 seconds to shut down that aircraft and exit the cockpit, or you will face immediate arrest and court-martial. This will result in decades of imprisonment. Do you understand the gravity of your actions? Lena closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the immense weight of the moment. It was a choice between her personal safety and the moral obligation that had been drilled into her since childhood. She was choosing the latter. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the head-up display, the tactical reality of the world unfolding before her. Sir, I understand the consequences of my actions, she said, her voice unwavering, but I cannot stand by while an inadequate intercept formation potentially allows hostile aircraft to threaten civilian populations. I am requesting permission to join the formation and demonstrate my qualifications through successful mission completion. Permission denied. Callahan's voice was a final, cold statement of absolute command authority, but as he spoke, a new voice cut through the communication, measured and carrying the unmistakable weight of someone who understood tactical aviation at a level far beyond the current crisis. Ellsworth operations. This is Colonel Sarah M.C. Kinley, NORAD Tactical Aviation Command. I've been monitoring this situation. What is your current intercept capability against the approaching unknown aircraft? The mention of Colonel M.C. Kinley, a name that commanded respect and carried an aura of unconventional authority, caused Callahan to hesitate. The chaos on the radio momentarily subsided, replaced by a new, focused tension. Colonel M.C. Kinley, ma'am, we have 2 certified pilots ready for immediate departure, but doctrine requires a 4-ship formation for this threat level. Callahan stammered, his usual composure rattled. The airman currently in aircraft 075,267 claims F-35 qualifications, but she is ground crew with no official pilot training or certification. Her claims are not credible. There was a long pause from M.C. Kinley's end. The silence was heavier than the chaos. It was the silence of a high-ranking officer processing information and making a decision that would defy every rule in the book. Major Callahan. M.C. Kinley's voice finally came back, her tone sharp and precise. Those unknown aircraft have just been positively identified as advanced reconnaissance platforms conducting detailed intelligence gathering on our defensive capabilities. Their mission success will compromise NATO operational security for years. What are your immediate options for an effective intercept? Callahan's silence spoke volumes. He had no more options. The system had failed. The rules were leading them toward a catastrophic, predictable failure, and his rigid adherence to those rules was about to cost them dearly. Into that silence, Lena keyed her microphone. Colonel M.C. Kinley, aircraft 075,267, is mission ready with a qualified pilot. I can provide the 4th aircraft for proper intercept formation. Senior Airman Moravec. M.C. Kinley's voice was directed at her now, a voice that was both a challenge and a lifeline. You understand that if you are not qualified for this mission, you could cause a catastrophic failure that results in loss of life and an international incident. Yes, ma'am, Lena replied, her voice filled with a quiet, unshakable conviction. I also understand that if we don't launch adequate intercept capability immediately, we guarantee mission failure through inaction. The tension reached a fever pitch. Major Callahan was undoubtedly screaming into his radio, but M.C. Kinley's voice was now the only one that mattered. The fate of the mission and of Lena's entire life hung in the balance. There was a final, profound pause, a moment where the rigid rules of military hierarchy battled with the raw, chaotic reality of a real-world threat. And then Colonel M.C. Kinley made her choice. Aircraft 075,267, you are cleared for immediate departure. Prove your qualifications through mission success, or face consequences that will destroy your life and possibly compromise national security. The choice is yours. Lena advanced the throttles, the F-35's massive Pratt & Whitney engine roaring to life beneath her. The sheer force of the 43,000 pounds of thrust pushed her back into her seat, a sensation she had only felt in a simulator, but one that was now a visceral, exhilarating reality. Roger, control, she said, her voice now a part of the professional air traffic. Aircraft 075,267, departing for intercept mission. Clearance or not, I will. The roar of the F-35's engine was a primal, earth-shaking sound, a physical manifestation of power that was both terrifying and exhilarating. As Lena Moravec advanced the throttles, the massive jet surged forward, its 43,000 pounds of thrust pushing her back into the ejection seat with a force she had only ever simulated. But this was no simulation. The G-forces pressed against her, a visceral confirmation that the rules of physics were now her new reality. The runway blurred into a grey streak, and in a breathtaking moment, the ground fell away. The familiar sight of Ellsworth Air Base shrank beneath her, a vast tapestry of hangars and concrete roads that had been her entire world just minutes ago. Now, it was a distant memory. She had broken the ground rules, and in doing so, she had found her true element. The ascension was a symphony of controlled acceleration and precise control inputs. Her hands, guided by muscle memory perfected over hundreds of hours of simulator training, moved across the flight controls with an innate grace. The aircraft, a marvel of fly-by-wire technology, responded to her every command with a fluidity that was both intuitive and deeply satisfying. She was no longer just a technician observing a machine, she was a part of it, a seamless extension of its formidable capabilities. Her mind, a finely tuned instrument of tactical and technical knowledge, was a whirlwind of data processing. She monitored her altitude, airspeed, and fuel state, all while listening to the frantic, disbelieving chatter of ground control. Major Callahan's furious voice was a distant, impotent sound, a last gasp of a system that had failed to see her potential. Colonel M.C. Kinley's last words, however, were a beacon of hope and a chilling ultimatum: prove your qualifications through mission success. As she climbed to a designated altitude, the world became a breathtaking canvas of blue and white. The sun, still low on the horizon, painted the clouds in hues of orange and gold. But Lena had no time for awe. She was a professional on a mission. She keyed her radio, her voice clear and steady. "This is aircraft 075267, airborne and on intercept vector, requesting rendezvous with the formation." The response came from Staff Sergeant Rivera, the designated flight lead. His voice was a mixture of disbelief and a strained professionalism. 075267, this is flight lead. Vector is 290 at 30,000 feet. "We're holding for you. Don't be late." Within minutes, she spotted them. 3 F-35 seconds hanging in the vast expanse of the sky, their stealthy forms almost invisible against the backdrop of the clouds. As she closed the distance, her focus was absolute. Her father had drilled into her the importance of formation flying, not just as a tactical maneuver, but as a statement of discipline and trust. She eased her F-35 into the designated fourth wing position, a precise, measured movement that seemed to defy the sheer speed and mass of the jet. She nestled into the formation, a tight symbiotic relationship where each aircraft was a part of a single, unified organism. Her wingman was Lieutenant Carter Bishop, a nervous but talented rookie pilot whose jittery energy was palpable even over the radio. She had watched him in the briefing rooms, a young man burdened by the immense responsibility of his position. He was a product of the system, a certified pilot with all the right qualifications. But in that moment, she was his wingman, a junior enlisted technician with a secret. "Falcon 4, this is Bishop." His voice crackled over the internal frequency, a mix of professionalism and barely concealed anxiety. "Your formation flying, it's a little tight, isn't it?" Lena didn't respond immediately. She adjusted her position, a slight, almost imperceptible correction that brought her to an even more precise distance from his jet. "My father always said, a wingman is not a passenger, Lieutenant," she finally replied, her voice calm and steady. "A wingman is a part of the plane." The silence that followed was a mix of confusion and reluctant admiration. He was witnessing a level of skill that he, a certified pilot, did not possess. The formation accelerated, a synchronized phalanx of advanced technology cutting through the sky. The tactical displays in Lena's cockpit were a kaleidoscope of information. radar contacts, a map of the airspace, and the designated threat vectors. The unidentified aircraft were now just minutes away, their red symbols moving inexorably closer to the American border. The air was thick with a palpable tension. This was not a drill, this was real. As they closed to within visual range, the mystery was solved. The unknown aircraft were not civilian planes, nor were they simple unguided drones. They were two Russian-made reconnaissance variants, likely a modified Su-35, sleek and menacing, equipped with advanced sensor packages and electronic warfare systems. Their configuration confirmed the intelligence assessment. This was a sophisticated intelligence-gathering mission, a deliberate and audacious probe of NATO defenses. The sight of the enemy aircraft, a physical manifestation of a geopolitical threat, sent a jolt of cold reality through the formation. Flight lead, this is Falcon 1, visual confirmation. Rivera's voice came over the radio, his tone hardening. 2 recon variants Su-35 seconds. We're commencing standard intercept protocol. Roger, flight lead. The other pilots responded in unison. But as Rivera began to transmit the standard radio challenge, Lena's tactical display flashed with an idea, a solution that was not in the standard playbook. Her father had taught her that in the theater of international air combat, the law could be a more potent weapon than a missile. A standard military challenge could be seen as an act of aggression, a diplomatic provocation that could quickly escalate. The more effective approach was to use a universally recognized, legally binding framework. Flight lead, this is Falcon 4, Lena transmitted, her voice cutting through the standard communication. Recommend we use legal protocol, Article 3 of the Chicago Convention. It's a non-escalatory but legally binding challenge. It gives us a stronger position. There was a moment of silence from Rivera. He was a seasoned pilot, but this was a tactical suggestion from a source he still considered illegitimate. But the logic was undeniable. Using a civilian aviation treaty to challenge a military reconnaissance flight was an unconventional but brilliant move. It would put the Russian pilots on notice that they were not just dealing with military force, but with a firm, legal foundation. Flight lead, Falcon 2 concurs. Bishop's voice chimed in, a sign that he was now trusting her judgment. It's a smart play. Rivera, a man of protocol, hesitated for a moment, weighing the unconventional nature of the suggestion against the sound logic. Finally, he relented. Roger, Falcon 4, transmit the legal challenge. Lena took a deep breath. She was now the voice of the formation, a junior airman speaking on behalf of an entire squadron. She keyed her microphone and her voice, calm and authoritative, filled the tense airwaves. Commander Markov, this is NATO Falcon 4. Your current operations are conducting intelligence gathering on NATO defensive procedures. This constitutes hostile reconnaissance activity. Under Article 3 of the Chicago Convention and NATO treaty provisions, your activities within 50 nautical miles of our critical infrastructure constitute a potential threat to civilian aviation safety and national security. We are authorized to escort your aircraft away from sensitive areas. The silence that followed was immense, a vast echoing void of professional surprise. The Russian commander, Viktor Markov, a pilot with a reputation for both skill and arrogance, had never been challenged in this way. He had been expecting a standard military standoff, a display of bravado and force. He was not expecting a legal lecture from a NATO wingman. NATO flight lead, this is Commander Markov. The Russian pilot's voice finally came over the airwaves, tinged with a mix of surprise and grudging respect. Your knowledge of international aviation law is impressive. Very well. We will accept escort to the edge of your claimed security zone, but we reserve the right to continue reconnaissance operations in truly international airspace. The tactical win was clear. Lena had achieved with words what a full military confrontation may have failed to accomplish. She had put the enemy on notice legally. The Russian commander, a man of pride and protocol, had backed down, not to force, but to law. It was an intellectual victory, a testament to her father's training and her own unyielding dedication to a deeper understanding of the skies. Falcon 4, that was brilliant. Bishop's voice came over the internal frequency, a genuine sense of awe in his tone. The nervous rookie was now a believer. He had seen a demonstration of a pilot's intellect that went beyond mere flying skills. But Lena had no time for congratulations. As the formation began the delicate process of escorting the reconnaissance aircraft away from sensitive areas, she noticed something troubling on her electronic warfare displays. The Su-35 seconds were continuing to operate their reconnaissance systems, gathering detailed intelligence on F-35 capabilities even as they complied with the escort requirements. The battle, she realized, was far from over. It had just entered its next, more subtle phase. The legal challenge had won them a temporary victory, but the real threat, the true reason for this encounter, was still very much alive. Her father's voice, a constant companion in her mind, offered a final piece of wisdom from one of his countless stories. "Never assume a victory is complete, my dear. In the sky, the enemy is always one step ahead, and the fight is never truly over until you are safely back on the ground." Lena knew he was right. The silence in the airwaves was a deceptive calm. The real danger, she instinctively knew, was still lurking, waiting for its moment to strike, and her years of training told her exactly where to look next. The escort operation proceeded with the precise choreography of military aviation at its most professional level. The 4 F-35 seconds maintained a flawless, disciplined formation, their presence a silent, formidable deterrent. Commander Viktor Markov's reconnaissance variants, though still operating their intelligence-gathering systems, were being guided steadily toward the edge of the claimed security zone. The airwaves were quiet, a tense silence punctuated only by the occasional professional communication. The feeling was one of a job well done, of a crisis successfully de-escalated through a combination of force projection and legal finesse. For the pilots in the formation, a sense of relief was beginning to set in. But Lena Moravec, flying the final wing, felt no such relief. Her electronic warfare displays, a constant stream of data she had learned to read with an almost psychic intuition, told a different story. The reconnaissance aircraft were still actively probing, their systems analyzing the F-35 seconds radar signatures and communication protocols, turning a diplomatic escort into a data-gathering bonanza. Her father's voice, a constant companion in her thoughts, warned her that in the theater of combat, the greatest deceptions were often found in the most predictable moments. A quiet enemy was not a defeated one. It was an enemy waiting for its opportunity. And Lena's senses, honed by a lifetime of preparation, were screaming that the moment was fast approaching. The deceptive calm was shattered in the space of 3 seconds. The radar warning receiver in Lena's cockpit exploded in a chorus of piercing, urgent alarms. A series of red symbols, like angry splinters of light, bloomed across her tactical display, their launch points pinpointed in the rugged, mountainous terrain below. She didn't need a second to process the data. She had run this scenario countless times in her simulator. The launch positions, carefully staggered and positioned to create overlapping engagement zones, were not random. They were a deliberate trap, a premeditated ambush designed to catch the NATO formation in a lethal crossfire. 6 surface-to-air missiles, sleek and fast, were streaking toward them. "Missiles inbound!" Lena transmitted immediately, her voice cutting through the startled communications of the other pilots. Multiple SAM launches from bearing 180. Estimated time to impact 90 seconds. The professional calm of the formation evaporated instantly, replaced by the controlled chaos of a combat situation. Alarms blared across all 4 cockpits. Lieutenant Carter Bishop's voice, a mixture of shock and terror, came over the frequency. "Missiles! They're locked on! Evasive maneuvers!" But as the formation began to respond with standard evasive procedures, Lena's tactical analysis, a lightning-fast process of data and instinct, told her it was a suicide run. The launch positions were too well placed, the engagement zones too broad. Standard maneuvers would only lead them into the path of another missile, a lethal game of hide and seek they could not win. The ambush was a masterpiece of tactical planning. "Flight lead, standard evasive maneuvers will not work." Lena's voice was sharp, authoritative, a command in itself. "The launch positions create a tactical trap. We need coordinated defensive actions to defeat the missile engagement. Formation, execute tactic Echo 7. There was a moment of silence from Staff Sergeant Rivera, the flight lead. He was a veteran, but Tactic Echo 7 was a high-risk, rarely used maneuver, one that required perfect synchronization and absolute trust. It was not in the standard playbook for a routine intercept. "Falcon 4, what are you talking about?" Rivera's voice was strained, filled with the pressure of a command he couldn't yet give. "Tactic Echo 7 is for multi-threat, high-intensity environments. We've never even practiced it together." "Sir, if we don't execute coordinated defenses, the missile engagement zones will prevent effective evasion for any of us," Lena countered, her analysis a cold, hard truth. "We use coordinated jamming and terrain masking to break the missile guidance locks. It's the only way out. We need to trust each other and execute as a formation." Bishop's voice, now surprisingly steady, backed her up. "She's right, flight lead. Tactic Echo 7 is our only option. The terrain below is our shield." Rivera, a man of protocol, had to make an impossible choice: trust a junior airman with no official flight credentials, or follow standard procedure and risk the lives of his entire formation. His decision came swiftly. "Falcon 4 is now tactical lead. All aircraft on my mark, execute tactic Echo 7. What followed was a breathtaking ballet of high-G maneuvering and electronic warfare, a desperate dance with death against the rugged, unforgiving terrain. The 4 F-35 seconds began a complex series of coordinated turns and dives, using the mountainous landscape as a shield. Their electronic warfare systems synchronized to create a powerful, unified jamming field. Lena found herself flying inverted at just 500 feet, her F-35 screaming through a narrow canyon, the ground a blur of rock and shadow just a few hundred feet below her canopy. The G-forces were immense, pushing her to the physical limits of human endurance. The mental demands were even greater. She had to maintain perfect formation integrity while monitoring the missile trajectories, the terrain, and the coordinated jamming. "Missiles at 30 seconds, Bishop reported, his voice strained but focused. "Maintain formation discipline," Rivera commanded. "Electronic warfare showing good coordination. Falcon 4, your timing is perfect." The minutes stretched into an eternity. The tactical display showed 5 of the 6 missile symbols flickering, their guidance systems confused by the coordinated jamming. One by one, they veered off course, their radar locks broken before self-destructing in a brilliant, fiery burst against the distant sky. The high-risk maneuver was working. They had defeated 5 of the 6 missiles. But the 6th missile, a more advanced variant, remained locked on its target. Its symbol on Lena's display was a relentless red dagger, closing in with terrifying speed. It had adapted to their countermeasures, its guidance system recalibrating in real time. The formation had survived, but the final deadly threat was now focused entirely on her. "Falcon 4 has 1 missile still tracking!" she reported, her voice calm and steady, despite the fact that she had perhaps 15 seconds before impact. Continuing evasive maneuvers, going to terrain mask. This was the moment that separated the exceptional from the merely competent. Her father had trained her for this. He had taught her to see the landscape not just as a backdrop, but as a weapon. She rolled her F-35 into a high-G knife-edge turn, a desperate maneuver that brought her dangerously close to the rocky terrain. Her goal was to use the radar shadow of a jagged ridgeline, a natural blind spot, to break the missile's final lock. She flew with a combination of raw courage and an absolute mastery of the aircraft, her hands making split-second control inputs that would have been impossible for anyone without her hours of training. The missile, a thing of cold, calculated precision, followed her into the canyon. But as she flew her F-35 low over the ridgeline, a flash of pure genius from her father's training came back to her. The missile's guidance system, designed to track an object in the open sky, could not distinguish her aircraft from the clutter of the rocky ridge behind it. The radar lock broke. The missile, suddenly blind and confused, lost its target. It flew past her, a harmless streak of light, before self-destructing in the empty air behind her. "Missile guidance broken," she reported, her voice a little breathless now. "Threat neutralized." The four F-35 seconds regrouped at 25,000 feet, all four aircraft intact and mission-capable, despite having survived the most sophisticated surface-to-air missile engagement any of them had ever experienced. The silence on the comms was now one of profound relief and dawning amazement. "Falcon 4, that was incredible," Rivera's voice came over the radio, a note of genuine awe replacing his professional calm. "You just saved the entire squadron." But as they conducted damage assessments and confirmed their tactical situation, the implications of what had just occurred became clear. "Flight lead," Lena transmitted, her tactical analysis already running. "This was a planned ambush. Someone knew our intercept procedures well enough to position mobile launchers for maximum effectiveness." Rivera's response carried the grim realization that they had been targeted by adversaries who understood NATO tactics in disturbing detail. "Agreed, Falcon 4. The question is, how?" Their discussion was interrupted by a new voice. The same voice that had reluctantly complied with Lena's legal challenge. "NATO formation," Commander Markov's voice came over the emergency frequency, a note of professional respect in his tone. "This is Markov. We have intelligence that additional missile batteries are positioned along your return route to Ellsworth. The ambush you just survived was the first phase of a larger operation. It seems you have a new enemy, and a very dedicated one at that." The ambush they had just survived was not the final threat, it was a test, and the real, far deadlier challenge was still ahead. The communication from Commander Viktor Markov hung in the air like a ghost, a chilling finality that turned the formation's relief into a renewed, bone-deep dread. The ambush they had just survived was not an isolated attack, but the first phase of a larger, more sophisticated operation. Their return route, a pre-programmed path back to the safety of Ellsworth Air Base, was now a corridor of death. 2 more ambushes awaited them, 2 more hidden SAM batteries positioned to finish what the first had started. The enemy was not just testing their defenses, they were studying them, luring them into a trap with a brutal, methodical precision. "Flight lead, this is Falcon 2. Lieutenant Carter Bishop's voice came over the radio, a note of grim realization in his tone. "That was a warning. A tactical courtesy, a courtesy that just saved our lives." Staff Sergeant Rivera, the flight lead, replied, his voice still shaken by the close call. He keyed his radio, attempting to raise Ellsworth. "Ellsworth operations, this is Falcon 1. We have received intelligence of a second-wave ambush on our return route, requesting new vectors and immediate tactical support. Do you copy?" The response was not the calm, professional voice of ground control. Instead, the radio was filled with a wall of static, a garbled hiss that spoke of a deep and sophisticated digital silence. They were alone. The enemy had not only planned ambushes on the ground, but they had also neutralized the squadron's connection to the command center. This was a complete end-to-end tactical operation designed to trap and destroy. The silence on the radio was a more terrifying threat than the SAMs themselves, for it meant they were cut off, their fate entirely in their own hands. "Ellsworth, this is Falcon 1. Do you copy? We are being digitally jammed." Rivera's voice grew more frantic, his attempts to break through the silence proving futile. The reality of their isolation was setting in. Without a link to the command center, they were flying blind, unable to receive new intel, new vectors, or even a simple confirmation that the base was aware of their predicament. Into this vacuum of information and command, a quiet, authoritative voice emerged. "Flight lead, this is Falcon 4. The jamming is systematic. Our secure channels are compromised. We need to assume the enemy knows our pre-planned return vectors. We must reroute now." There was no debate. No one questioned the legitimacy of the order. Lena had just saved all of their lives with her tactical brilliance. She had earned the right to command, not through rank, but through sheer, unassailable competence. "Falcon 4, you have tactical lead." Rivera's voice was a simple, professional concession of authority. The rigid hierarchy of the military had bent to the will of a technician. A silent, unspoken acknowledgement that in a crisis, capability mattered more than credentials. "Roger, flight lead," Lena replied, her voice calm and steady, the weight of command settling over her shoulders with a quiet grace. Her mind, a finely tuned instrument of tactical analysis, began to work with a speed that astonished even her. She didn't just need a new route, she needed a route that was strategically sound, one that would anticipate the enemy's next move. She recalled countless hours of studying topographical maps and intelligence briefings, unofficial lessons from her father about the art of predicting an enemy's actions based on their previous moves. The first ambush had been in the mountains, a classic use of terrain for concealment. The next two would likely use a similar pattern, leveraging natural choke points and blind spots. Falcon formation, new vector is 140. We are taking the low-level pass through the central plains and then a high-altitude hop over the eastern mountain range. Lena transmitted, her plan concise and immediate. "The enemy expects us to fly a direct line back to Ellsworth, using the western mountains for cover. They've positioned their batteries accordingly. We will fly a different profile. It's a longer route, but it's our only way home." The formation, without a moment's hesitation, banked in unison, a synchronized ballet of trust and obedience. Lena led them into a vast, open expanse of rolling plains, a landscape that offered no cover, no shadows, a move that would have seemed insane to a pilot trained to use terrain to their advantage. But this was the genius of her plan. She was flying into the open, a move so counterintuitive that the enemy would not have anticipated it. They were expecting a cat-and-mouse game in the mountains, a fight they were prepared for. Lena was taking them to a place where the enemy was not. As they flew low and fast over the endless fields, their tactical displays were a nervous stream of data. Their radar, however, remained silent. The hours stretched on, a long, tense flight where every shadow, every hill seemed to hide a threat. Bishop's voice, a little less anxious than before, came over the internal frequency. "How do you know this is the right way, Falcon 4? What if they have more batteries out here?" "They don't," Lena replied, her confidence absolute. "Their tactical profile is a classic ambush pattern. It's all about control and predictable movement. Their second and third ambushes are designed to force us into a specific flight path, a path that we are no longer on. They've invested heavily in those mountain passes. They wouldn't have the resources or the time to position more batteries in the open plains. We are in a blind spot of their own making." Her prediction was confirmed a few minutes later. As they flew past a distant mountain range, their long-range sensors detected a burst of brief electronic activity. The signal was unmistakable, a SAM battery attempting to lock onto a target that was no longer there. The ambush was real, and they had just flown past it, undetected. A collective sigh of relief, a tense, silent acknowledgement of Lena's tactical genius, passed through the formation. They had escaped the second wave of hidden SAM batteries, their lives once again saved by a technician's insight. But the journey was far from over. As they climbed to a higher altitude for the final leg of their journey home, the communication with Ellsworth remained unstable. The jamming was still in effect, a relentless electronic wall that separated them from the base. They could receive intermittent signals, but their transmissions were either garbled or failed to get through at all. The crisis on the ground, the panic in the command center, the frantic search for a solution, all of it was a world away. They were returning home, but they were still an unknown quantity. A squadron of fighter jets, the most advanced in the world, was a ghost in the system, a threat to be identified and potentially neutralized. The first problem was solved, but the second, far more insidious one, now loomed on the horizon. The journey had tested their skills, their trust, and their ability to adapt. But the final test, the ultimate test of their survival, would not come from an external enemy, but from the very people they were sworn to protect. The journey home was a tense, silent affair. The exhilaration of escaping the ambushes had given way to the grim, methodical concentration of a squadron flying blind. The communication with Ellsworth Air Base remained unstable, a relentless wall of static that made it impossible to receive new directives or even signal their safe return. As they flew over the final stretch of terrain, the silhouette of the airbase appeared on the horizon, a welcome sight of concrete and light that promised safety, normalcy, and the end of a terrifying ordeal. For the other pilots, the sight of home was a sign of victory. But for Lena Moravec, it was the beginning of the final, most terrifying problem. As they began their descent, Lena's tactical display, a constant stream of information she processed with an almost psychic speed, began to show a new, chilling anomaly. It wasn't a problem with the aircraft, it was a problem with their very identity. Her transponder and IFF identification friend or foe systems were transmitting corrupted data. It wasn't a simple failure. It was a sophisticated digital attack, a final insidious phase of the enemy's operation. The jamming wasn't just designed to block communication, it was designed to spoof it, to make them appear to the base's automated defense systems not as returning heroes, but as hostile intruders. She saw the warnings first, a series of yellow and red alerts flashing across her display, indicating a hostile ID and unauthorized incursion. Her IFF system, a crucial piece of technology designed to identify friendly aircraft, was transmitting a false, unrecognizable signature. The other pilots, operating with standard protocols and expecting a seamless transition back to base, were oblivious. They were flying on instinct and hope, assuming that as soon as they were in range, the base would recognize them. Lena knew better. Her father had warned her about the evolution of electronic warfare, of battles won not with missiles, but with manipulated data. He had spent countless hours teaching her about the intricacies of transponder codes and the cryptographic keys that protected IFF systems, a knowledge that was considered obscure and unnecessary for a ground crew technician. Now, that knowledge was the only thing standing between them and a friendly fire disaster. "Ellsworth, this is Falcon 1, Staff Sergeant Rivera transmitted, his voice a mixture of relief and professional calm. "We're in range. Requesting clearance for final approach. Do you copy?" The response was a static-filled, garbled hiss, followed by an automated, chilling message from the base's defense system. Warning: unauthorized aircraft detected. Threat level high. Stand by for defensive engagement. The horror of the situation hit the other pilots like a physical blow. Their displays, now flashing with the same red and yellow warnings, told them the unthinkable truth. The base, their home, was about to shoot them down. "What is happening?" Lieutenant Carter Bishop's voice, a terrified whisper, came over the frequency. "My IF is showing a false positive. The base thinks we're hostile. This is Falcon 1. Rivera's voice was now filled with a frantic panic. "We are friendly. We are returning. F-35 seconds. Stand down. Stand down." But the base's automated defense system, a cold, unfeeling instrument of military protocol, was not listening to pleas. It was following its programming. A new warning flashed on Lena's display. Defensive engagement protocol initiated. Activation in 60 seconds. The clock was ticking. A friendly fire disaster was now a matter of seconds away. The other pilots were in a state of sheer terror, their minds unable to process a threat that was coming from a place of safety. They were trained to fight an external enemy, to evade missiles from a hidden battery. They were not trained to fight their own, but Lena was. Her mind, now a finely tuned instrument of combat, didn't panic. It began to process the problem with a detached clinical efficiency. She knew that the standard protocols were useless. The jamming was too sophisticated. She had to bypass the entire system to use a method that was so obscure, so unconventional, that the enemy would not have anticipated it. She recalled a conversation with her father, a late-night lesson from a dusty manual he had saved from his own days as a test pilot. He had taught her a hardened backup protocol, a manual override that bypassed the automated systems and allowed for a direct, secure transmission using a specific, archaic cryptographic key. It was a failsafe for an era before advanced digital jamming, a piece of old-world knowledge in a new world war. Her hands moved with a speed and precision that defied the terror of the moment. She manually reconfigured her communication systems, bypassing the automated IFF and transponder. She opened a secure, encrypted channel, one that was not in the official Air Force manual, but in a series of handwritten notes her father had given her. She entered a specific cryptographic key, a complex sequence of numbers and letters she had memorized years ago as a mental exercise. The act was a defiance of protocol, a leap of faith into a system that was only supposed to exist on the pages of an old notebook. As she worked, the automated defense system's countdown continued. 30 seconds, 20 seconds. The other pilots were now screaming into their radios, their voices a symphony of desperation and fear. "Ellsworth Command, this is NATO Falcon 4. Lena's voice, though firm, carried an urgency that cut through the chaos. "Manual transmission on hardened channel 277.5. We are 4 F-35s returning from intercept. I say again, 4 F-35s. Stand down, immediate defensive operations." The effect was instantaneous. The signal, transmitted on a channel the jamming could not touch, and authenticated with a key the spoofing could not replicate, broke through the digital wall. The countdown on her display stopped at 10 seconds. The red alerts flashed to green. The threat was neutralized. On the ground, in the chaos of the command center, the message was received by a confused but quick-thinking radio operator. The base commander, hearing the clear, ungarbled voice and seeing the suddenly friendly radar signature, gave the stand-down order. The squadron was safe. The landing was a quiet, tense affair. The aircraft touched down in a precise, professional sequence, their engines roaring one last time before falling silent. The ground crews, who had been watching the harrowing display on their own tactical displays, were a silent, stunned audience. The pilots, their faces pale with the shock of what had just happened, were met not with cheers, but with a wall of silent, disbelieving stares. The airbase was a place of ordered protocol, and a junior airman had just bypassed every rule in the book to save them from a friendly fire disaster. As Lena powered down her F-35 and prepared to exit the cockpit, she knew that the battle was over, but the war for her own future had just begun. She had defied orders, stolen a fighter jet, and saved her squadron from an enemy that no one could see. And now she had to face the consequences, not on the battlefield, but in the sterile, unforgiving arena of a military tribunal. The descent from the F-35's cockpit was not a hero's walk of triumph, but a somber march to an uncertain fate. As Lena Moravec's boots touched the tarmac, the engines of her jet falling silent behind her, she was met not with cheers or congratulations, but with the stern, unsmiling faces of military police. There was no fanfare, no ceremony. Her heroics, in the eyes of the law, were a litany of offences that could not be overlooked. She was placed under arrest, the cold snap of the handcuffs on her wrists a chilling punctuation mark to the end of her mission. The walk to the base's tribunal room was a journey from the chaotic life-or-death world of the cockpit to the sterile, unforgiving world of military justice. The tribunal room itself was a monument to order and protocol. A long, dark table dominated the space, where a panel of senior officers sat in grim silence. At the head of the table sat Colonel Reeves, the squadron commander, his face a mask of cold fury. Beside him was Major Callahan, his expression a mixture of professional outrage and personal vindication. The panel was a physical representation of the system Lena had defied. But across from them sat one unexpected figure, Colonel Sarah M.C. Kinley, her expression unreadable, her presence a flicker of hope in an otherwise desolate room. The charges were read, a list of violations that seemed to grow with every word: theft of military property, unauthorized operation of a weapons system, insubordination, and multiple breaches of military code. Colonel Reeves presented the case against her with a measured, prosecutorial calm, his voice filled with the unassailable logic of institutional order. Regardless of the outcome of her actions, her fundamental breach of military discipline cannot be overlooked, he stated, his gaze fixed on Lena. If we allow subordinates to decide which orders to follow, we undermine the entire structure of military command. Her actions, while perhaps born of a desperate situation, were an act of dangerous insubordination that must be punished with a court-martial to set a precedent and protect the integrity of our chain of command. It was a powerful argument, a fortress of logic built on the foundation of military law. But Colonel M.C. Kinley, a woman who had seen the system fail in the face of raw talent, was ready with a counter-argument. She spoke not of law, but of results. With all due respect, Colonel, your argument presumes a choice existed where none did, she began, her voice a calm intellectual counterpoint to Reeves's fury. The fact is, Major Callahan's adherence to procedure would have resulted in the catastrophic failure of the mission. Senior Airman Moravec's actions, while unorthodox, were the only possible path to success. She provided the fourth aircraft, a tactical necessity. She used international law to de-escalate a confrontation, a move that stunned the adversary. She led the squadron through a coordinated missile ambush, with a tactic that saved every life in that formation. And most critically, she single-handedly averted a friendly fire disaster by identifying a sophisticated digital attack that no one else saw and using a specialized hardened protocol to break through. M.C. Kinley's words were a relentless barrage of facts, each one a nail in the coffin of the prosecution's argument. She had painted a picture not of a rogue airman, but of a prodigy, a person whose knowledge and capability far exceeded the box the system had placed her in. "We are not here to debate a breach of protocol," MC Kinley concluded, her voice gaining a sharp, undeniable authority. "We are here to decide if we are an organization that rewards talent or one that punishes it for not conforming to our outdated expectations." The panel was silent, the two opposing arguments hanging in the air. The rigid world of military law was now in direct conflict with the chaotic, undeniable reality of a combat situation. Major Callahan, a man of protocol, could not refute the facts of the mission, but Colonel Reeves, a man of institutional order, could not bring himself to endorse an act of flagrant insubordination. The tribunal was at a stalemate. The fate of Lena Moravec, and by extension, the future of the Air Force's approach to talent, hung in the balance. Just as the silence threatened to become a verdict, the doors to the tribunal room opened. A new figure strode in, her presence so commanding that every officer in the room stood to attention. She was in a full dress uniform, her rank a stark, undeniable testament to her authority. Brigadier General Ilona Vesely, a former test pilot, a longtime NATO tactician, and a legend in her own right. She walked to the center of the room, her gaze fixed on Lena, and a small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "Colonel Reeves, Colonel MC Kinley, gentlemen," she said, her voice filled with a quiet authority that silenced any potential objections. "I believe I can offer some context to this discussion." She turned her attention to the panel. "I have read the mission reports, I have listened to the recordings, I have seen the telemetry data from her F-35. Her performance was not a fluke, it was not a reckless act of bravery, it was a demonstration of absolute, unassailable competence. Her knowledge of our systems, her tactical brilliance, her ability to predict a threat that no one else saw, it's all there." The panel looked at her, then at Lena, their faces a canvas of confusion. General Vesely then said two words that would change everything. "I trained him." The room was silent. General Vesely looked at Lena, a look of profound respect and affection in her eyes. "I trained her father. He was a brilliant pilot, a tactician ahead of his time. He was a good friend, and he taught me that the best pilots are not born in an academy. They are forged by a lifetime of obsession and preparation. He taught her everything he knew, and more." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. She was born for this. Her training, while not sanctioned by this institution, is more thorough than most of the pilots we send into the air. What you see as a rogue technician, I see as a pilot who simply found her own way home. The verdict was now clear. A general, a legend, had not just defended Lena, she had validated her. Her actions were no longer a breach of military discipline, but a testament to a training that was, in its own way, more rigorous than the official one. General Vesely's words had reframed the entire narrative, changing Lena from a criminal into a prodigy. The final verdict was not a punishment, but a recognition. Lena Moravec was to be relieved of her duties as a senior airman and was officially inducted into the Air Force's experimental pilot program. Her unauthorized flight would be officially classified as an emergency response to tactical conditions. The chain of command, a system that had tried to punish her, had finally been forced to recognize her. As Lena was escorted out of the tribunal room, no longer under arrest but under a new command, her future as a pilot was no longer a dream she had to hide in a simulator. It was a reality. Her defiance of the rules had not broken her, it had freed her. She had proven that true ability, True courage and true competence could not be contained by the rigid lines of an organizational chart. She had not only saved her squadron, she had saved herself, and in doing so had become a legend in the making. And so, the legend of Lena Moravec, the technician who became a pilot, comes to a close. What a ride, right? This story is a powerful reminder that true capability often exists where we least expect it. It's a story of courage, defiance, and the ultimate triumph of talent over rigid protocol. Thank you for tuning in to Veteran Biker. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let us know what you think in the comments below. We love hearing from our community. We've got more incredible stories waiting for you right now. Just click on one of the videos you see on your screen to keep the adventure going. Until next time, stay safe out there.